Mizzou football has its first exit of the portal period in the spring. And I'm not going to lie, this one does sting a bit, so let's talk about it and some hoops too. Right now, I'm Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And I have to say, it's not time to panic yet, but I'm getting increasingly nervous about Missouri's yield in the basketball transfer portal. So we are going to start with some football, with that being said. And also do want to quickly start by saying that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $250 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And again, I want to start here on the gridiron, but unfortunately not great news here either. Nothing to panic on this side. In fact, probably much less to even be concerned about, I would say, on the football side. But Eli Drinkwitz this week had made reference to as many as 8 guys maybe exiting the program here in the spring portal period. Well, the first one, Jahkai Lang, a man who is going to be a redshirt sophomore this upcoming season, actually was second on the team in sacks with, well, just not a gigantic number, obviously, just 3 sacks on the season for Lang, playing in 12 games last season. I will say on the optimistic side, hopefully that means that Darius Smith is looking good. The Georgia transfer from a couple seasons ago, from a couple cycles ago, let's put it that way, who before the 2024 season, Smith was expected to be a huge part of the Missouri pass rush before tearing his ACL in fall camp. And also on the positive side, really edge rusher right now, another Georgia transfer, I should say, Damon Wilson, among of what promises to be a really strong defensive end edge rushing unit here for Missouri. Zion Young coming back, Nate Johnson, a player that Missouri got in the portal, among several others. Unfortunately, on the negative side, I certainly would have preferred to have kept Lang around. This does hurt Missouri's depth at that spot a little bit, but again, other than maybe linebacker, this is probably a spot on the defense you could have afforded to lose more than anything. But for the most part, really, I think over the last few years, I've said it before, I'll say it again, for the most part, these are guys that Missouri can afford to lose who have exited the program. There's been some exceptions to that in this offseason. I think obviously Missouri would have preferred to keep Williams Winery and Courtney Crutchfield around, for example. Kyan Lacey, the running back as well, who's now at Ole Miss. There's been some exits that have stung a little bit, and I think I would put this pretty close to being in that column. I really would. Lang was a guy that I definitely would have liked to have kept around the roster, and a guy who wasn't a gigantic glitz and glamour, tons of stars type of recruit coming out of high school, but a guy after his redshirt season in 2023 really seemed to be coming along last season. I was curious to see what he could do in 2025. Well, at least for now, looks like he's going to be doing it on somebody else's roster. And just like that, with a snap of the finger, magically, the Missouri football season is 2 days closer. Yes, abracadabra, Eli Drinkwitz reached out and grabbed you another Thursday night football game. And if you thought that was an incredibly lame line, don't blame me, blame Steve Miller. He's the one who wrote the song. But regardless, I digress. The opener, week 1 for Missouri football season, is moved to Thursday, August 28th, now a 6:30 kickoff against Central Arkansas. This is now the 4th straight season that Missouri has made this move, which started under the Desiree Reed-Francois administration. Hey, whoever's idea it was, I've been on board the entire time. Obviously, Missouri students And, well, the alums as well, especially the ones who like to take in a final weekend at the Lake of the Ozarks, that type of deal. Well, a lot of them don't stick around for the Saturday game, especially against an opponent like Central Arkansas. Especially, understandably, sickos like me are going to be there regardless, especially ones that live locally here in Columbia. But if you're a St. Louis person, a KC person, I can understand why you might be scratching that particular game off the list. So it is nice on a couple different levels, not only for, well, getting out of the way of that weekend there. Hey, a lot of people take off that Friday as well, but also just in terms of weather. 6:30, a lot better of a kickoff time than often what it would be. 11 a.m. or even worse, 2:30 in the afternoon, that type of deal. Some absolutely sweltering late August, early September games in the past. So I think all of us are happy to avoid that. And from Eli Drinkwitz himself, he says, quote, "We're excited to keep this new tradition going, and we want to thank Central Arkansas and the SEC for agreeing to the change. We're looking forward to seeing a packed Memorial Stadium and continuing our sellout streak into 2025. So to that point, I do think that gives Missouri a much better shot to keep a sellout streak going, and I think there's a pretty good chance at that. After another 10-win season, Kansas coming as part of the season ticket package. Obviously, that's gonna cause more and more ticket sales, I think. Alabama on the schedule as well. South Carolina, a lot of premium home games this season. In fact, 8 total. You're definitely getting your money's worth at Memorial Stadium this season. And by the way, another advantage, said it before, I'll say it again, it was especially important, it seemed, in 2023 against Kansas State. But this also gives Missouri 2 more days to prepare for, yes, the Kansas Jayhawks in week 2 as well. To me, this is just win, win, win all the way around. Like Eli Drinkwitz says, let's keep this new tradition going. Let's start every single year on Thursdays as far as I'm concerned. Hey, SEC, Greg Sankey, why not? You owe us a solid. We're the ones who started this tradition. We started it. We're the pioneers. I think we should be able to settle on the ground as well. And transitioning to basketball here, Kyan Evans from Colorado State, also formerly of Kansas City, Missouri in high school. Well, Evans was a guy that I thought, hey, may well be a Missouri-Kansas battle here. Turns out I was wrong. Let's talk about more of the portal happenings and also why I'm getting increasingly nervous about Missouri's portal haul here. And I'll talk about more about that here coming up in just a minute. But also, if you love basketball like I do, the NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. You got to love how FanDuel makes betting so easy, whether it's picking my favorite team or diving into all types of player props. Jonte Porter. Oh, sorry, I had to. I'm sorry. I genuinely apologize for that terrible joke. But I'll tell you this, the more interesting part of this, the NBA playoffs, the futures. Do the Denver Nuggets have a chance after firing Mike Malone? What do you all think? I think maybe a change could spark Jokic and the Nuggets just a little bit. But whatever you think, don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. As I alluded to, Kyan Evans, formerly of Colorado State. No, he's not a Missouri Tiger, nor a Kansas Jayhawk, thankfully, but he is a North Carolina Tar Heel, so I wasn't too far off in terms of, well, my evaluation and his value in the transfer portal marketplace. But what I do think may be something I undervalued is that I think perhaps Dennis Gates, especially in the backcourt, I think after, well, the bad second season at Missouri, learned that he needs size in the backcourt, and really specifically, he needs two-way players as much as possible in the backcourt and on the wing. And, well, I think the last month of the season or so for Missouri probably taught that lesson once again. And as good of a offensive player as Kyan Evans is, he's an excellent shooter, no doubt about it. Had a great game in the first round of their Colorado State's NCAA tournament win, by the way, as well. Well, you just wonder if listed at 6'1", 170 pounds, how much defensively he would be picked on in the backcourt, especially when Missouri already has a point guard, obviously, in Anthony Robinson. And then your backup at point guard, presumably, is T.O. Barrett, at least on the roster at the moment. You're talking about a couple of guys who are 6'3" and 6'4". That's pretty good size at the point guard position. So Evans, if he's truly a point guard, well, you're already got a little bit of a log jam here. What Missouri needs more is an off-the-ball type of player and who's more of a two-way player, somebody who can guard. And I think that's exactly what Sebastian Mack is, the former UCLA two-year player. He's a guy who can play defense based on every reputation, every write-up I've seen about that young man. He's a defensive stopper. So while he's not as good of a shooter as Evans, there's no doubt about that so far in his career, I think this is actually a pretty good move by Missouri. Now, the part of this that's starting to make me a little bit nervous is while there are still some big names in the portal out there, for example, like St. John's R.J. Louis, but I would say a slight majority, certainly not all of the biggest names, but probably a slight majority of the biggest names right now, if you just look at like the top 100 over at on3.com, for example, well, most of them have come off the board. Take Jaden Quaintance, for example. He went to Kentucky, as all of you know by now. Certainly as all of you everydayers are well aware. Bennett Sturts ranked as the number 2 player in all of the transfer portal, of course, off to Iowa. The previously mentioned R.J. Louis, the only player in the top 4 still out there. But there's still a lot of interesting players in the portal. The problem is just the longer the process plays out, I have to admit I'm getting a little bit nervous with each and every passing day as something major doesn't break here. So hopefully Missouri and Dennis Gates has something up their sleeve here. But I think if the best player you get in the transfer portal is Sebastian Mack, that's okay. We just need at least a couple more players who are of his caliber, but probably a little bit different of a skill set. I would prefer really 2 more two-way players would be perfect. Even if they aren't the perfect offensive option that Dennis Gates would maybe prefer, I think Missouri has got to make a little bit of a commitment to defense next season. Dennis Gates is a guy who can obviously coach offense. Let's make a commitment to defense next season, because that was as much a reason as anything as Missouri had a giant improvement this past season. And as I've said many times here, possibly to ad nauseum for you everydayers, I would prefer a defensive-oriented, rim-protecting style center in the portal if Missouri can get one. If there is indeed one out there who is worthy of being on the Missouri roster next season. I don't have any specific names for you right off the top of my head. So I have to say, one of the biggest questions for next year is, are any of the 5 men or centers, any of these potential 5 men on the roster right now, are they SEC worthy? Can any of them carry the load in any significant way? Of course, the 2 sophomores who were freshmen last season, Peyton Marshall and Trent Burns, who didn't play at all because of injury last season. You also wonder, hey, Javon Porter, is he a 5 potentially in the SEC? Can he actually play some center, at least part-time? I'm not expecting him to do it for 25 minutes a night necessarily, but can Porter play some center? Can he hold up with his 6'11" body in the paint and at least be somewhat of a deterrent in the paint? That's a question that Missouri's going to have to ask themselves this offseason, I think. Then Mark Mitchell, of course, is a look. You can play him as your de facto 5-man as well. And I say de facto because, of course, he'd really just be a small ball 5 at that point. He's not really a true center. He's a 5-man, but not really a center, if that distinction makes any sense. Certainly, Missouri could score a whole bunch of points with that type of lineup, I think. But again, I think Dennis Gates can figure out how to score with a lot of different types of lineups. I think Missouri needs to lean more into defense next season. And speaking of centers and 5-men and post players, whatever you want to call it, I just see how much talk online from a lot of different people, including some Mizzou reporters and all that stuff, about how Missouri needs somebody who can score, quote, down low. What does that even mean would be my question. Like, specifically, do these people want someone who can finish plays around the rim, above the rim with the dunk, alley-oops, that type of thing? Or would you prefer somebody who can play with his back to the basket and post up? Because usually those two things don't go together. Obviously, you would have both of those skills. But, of course, back to the basket players in general are just a dying breed. I think, really, if you're counting on somebody to be a back-to-the-basket scorer for you, I think it's Peyton Marshall. I think that guy is already on this roster. And if he's not up to that, if you don't think he's actually up to snuff to score down low in the SEC, well, I would question why he remains on the roster. I think this is a huge season for Peyton Marshall to see what he's got ultimately in this conference. Showed a lot of flashes and some negative flashes as well. I don't want to get too negative or too positive. The guy barely played. So, again, I'm mostly just pointing out the questions here that the Missouri roster has to ask themselves. What I'm asking is, why is everybody so obsessed with Missouri getting a big guy who can score, regardless of whether it's finishing with around the rim more or less with dunks and putbacks, that type of deal, or pick and rolls, that type of thing, or more of a traditional back-to-the-basket big man? Either way, I question why people are focusing on the offense. Missouri's never really had a problem scoring, at least in 2 of the 3 years under Dennis Gates. Missouri has had one of the best offenses in school history, at least in the post-Norm Stewart era. There's no question about that. So to me, focusing on the offense is missing the point a little bit, especially when it comes to a big man. And coming up, Missouri assistant Rob Summers has found himself a head coaching position in a familiar spot to Dennis Gates, certainly. And also, Josh Gray has entered the transfer portal. I'm sorry, what? Well, let's talk about that here in a little bit. And also, if there are any double standards in what we want in football and basketball postseason, coming up right after this. So I've been staring at Josh Gray's KenPom page for a good 3 or 4 minutes here, trying to figure out how he could possibly have any eligibility remaining. And I got nothing. I got to be honest with you, because after playing 5 seasons of SEC basketball, starting in 2021, well, I get it. That first season at LSU didn't count for Josh Gray, just like it didn't count for anybody. Yes, COVID-19. Wasn't that a fun period of our lives? But then 4 seasons, 3 at South Carolina, 1 at Missouri, all of which he played a lot of games in, by the way. Unless Josh Gray, his second season at South Carolina, he played 24 games, then 32, 31, 33 at Missouri. Unless he ended that season with an injury and somehow 24 games is enough to apply for a medical red shirt of some sort, I'm just not seeing how Josh Gray can possibly be eligible for anyone, much less Missouri or anybody else. This isn't a Diego Pavia situation or a Jacob Cruz situation, I guess more specifically here, where your junior college eligibility evidently no longer counts towards your Division I eligibility in basketball. So I don't know. Maybe this is just a Hail Mary here, just covering all his bases. I got to say, I'm as confused as Eli Drinkwitz, who doesn't know what the crap is going on in general. I don't know what the crap is going on with Josh Gray. That's for darn sure. By the way, Rob Summers, who had just spent 1 year, his first year as a Missouri assistant, now off to Cleveland State, Dennis Gates' old stomping grounds, to be their head coach. So you never know. Maybe Rob Summers will be back at Missouri as their head coach one day. Hopefully not. Hopefully Dennis Gates is here for another 20 years or so. That would be my genuine wish in life. But also I had an interesting email, I thought, from listener Jordan, who basically he had a lot of thoughts here. I'm going to kind of just narrow them down here for you quickly as I can. Basically, Jordan's point is that, hey, if everybody likes the Cinderella teams, and he's saying that, well, there was some complaining that there weren't a lot of upsets in the NCAA tournament this season. Well, there weren't a lot of upsets in the 12-team playoff this year, for example. And his whole thing is, well, why the double standard between, hey, we like the chaos, but yet, well, why shouldn't we want to, basically expand the football field then as well? Then there'll be more chaos, more potential Cinderellas, that type of deal. My whole thing is, I don't know that it has to be a perfectly rational or logical decision, number one, because a lot of my love for the 64-team era is indeed that, well, it's all I've really ever known. Of course, it's expanded to 65, then 68 if you include the play-in games. But there is just something about that format that, in my opinion, works for basketball. Whereas in football, for example, if you went as crazy to 32 or 64, something like that, well, it would just take forever to play, number one. You can play 2 basketball games in 3 days is what often happens and, well, always happens in the NCAA tournament. Whereas in these college football playoff games, they end up, putting them a week and a half, 2 weeks apart. I just think that's a big factor there alone. And just with basketball also, there's a lot more variance. If you had a 4-team or a 12-team playoff in basketball, for example, well, that just wouldn't seem like nearly enough teams. Now, I understand that this season, yes, the 4 number 1 seeds all made it and advanced. That's a rare thing. It's only happened once in the history of the tournament. I don't know that that is a harbinger of, well, forever there's going to be no upsets, that type of deal. I also don't think you expand the football field out, I don't think you're necessarily going to get that many upsets. And to the idea, Jordan's idea that, hey, some buys in the tournament in the field of 64, I don't know. You're right. In terms of actually being a perfectly fair way to decide the champion, it really isn't the most fair way to decide the champion, that being March Madness. But it is an entertaining way, and ultimately that is all entertainment. So is there a double standard there? Yeah, probably. Ultimately, this is all entertainment and feel, and the idea that we have to have perfect equality and equity or fairness between two different sports, that idea doesn't really track to me. But regardless, Jordan, thanks for listening to the show as always, and thanks to all of you for making Locked On Mizzou your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On NFL Draft with Damian Parson and Keith Sanchez as Luther Burden, Armand Bamboo, and yes, Brady Cook get ready for the next level. Get ready with the latest rankings, rumors, and news every day. Find Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube and everywhere you listen to podcasts. So until next time, I'm John Miller. Thanks for listening to Locked On Mizzou.